Shalom, everyone, again, and welcome to part 3 of Where is King Solomon's Temple really located? The subject material for this video is about a threshing floor. What is a threshing floor? Well, it's defined as the follows, okay? Sheaves of grain would be opened up and the stalks spread across a threshing floor. It's a flat, hardened surface, okay? Pairs of donkeys or oxen, sometimes cattle or horses, would then be walked round and around, often dragging a heavy threshing board behind them to tear the ears of grain from the stalks and loosen the grain itself from the husk. Okay? The husk is the waste material. The grain, the meal, the wheat, and all of that, that's what you use to make hamanz and bread and all that good stuff, okay? Cereals and other kinds of bread-based products. Well, I want to tell you a story, and just bear with me here. Take you back in the time of King David. He was in his latter years. He was still making some tactical mistakes. I don't think they were intentional sins, but he made a few mistakes. Well, picture this situation. King David wanted a census, okay? And Orthodox Judaism, and you can read Ramban about this, and even his grandson even commented about this, Ramban, Rabbi Moshe Maimonides, very famous sage of old, lived in about 12th century. Anyway, taking a census is very problematic. First of all, it has to be God-directed through a prophet, not the imagination or innovations of a king to make himself feel bigger than he really is, okay? Evidently, and when you read 2 Samuel chapter 24, verses 18 to 25, or you can read about it in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 22 to 30, there was a census that was not taken correctly, at least according to the Lord's estimation. And I was doing some research on this. Of course, in the United States, we have census. Many other countries have census for population and demographics, and it helps for public welfare and things of that nature. If you don't know how one state is outperforming another state as far as population, how do you know how much federal funds are sent to that state? That's the United States. But in tribal Israel, a little bit different, okay? There were privacy concerns, okay? The number of my family, the number of sons and daughters I have in my family, it's really no one's business but my own, okay? Individual families can be counted. That's okay in a tribal respect. But there has to be a clear reason and rationale to invade people's privacy, because it was considered an invasion of privacy. And in fact, the story here that Gad, the prophet, the seer to King David, told him that the God had dispatched an angel of the Lord to conduct judgment against the nation of Israel. And King David was terrified about that. I'm going to read you a little bit of this. Gad came to David on that day and said to him, "Go up and erect an altar to Hashem on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite." Okay? There was a plague ongoing. Thousands of Jews died because of it, okay? Some people were counted, and other people were not counted. I don't want to get into details, not germane. You can read about it further in Chronicles and Samuel. The important thing is here that there was an ongoing pestilence in Israel. And according to the seer, Gad, who was representing the authority of God, the nation of Israel during that time, in King David's latter years, said a way to alleviate this pestilence, this ongoing pestilence, is to do the following. As you know, the old city of David was only about 26 acres, very small, kind of oval shaped. It was an old Jebusite Canaanite city, and actually, the king Araunah was still there, and I guess in his house or household, King David was very gracious, did not kick him out for not paying his lease payments or whatever. But anyway, he owned a threshing floor. I already explained what a threshing floor is, okay? So Gad said, go up and erect an altar to Hashem on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Now, at this time, so David went up as Gad had said, and Hashem had commanded. Araunah looked out and saw the king and his servants coming across to him. Araunah went out and prostrated himself to the king with his face to the ground, showing him humility and reverence for the king of Israel. Araunah, because King David treated him kindly, okay? Araunah asked, why has my lord the king come to his servant? And David replied, to buy a threshing floor from you in order to build an altar to Hashem, so that the pestilence may cease from the people. Okay, Araunah knew what was happening in the city, and there was a pestilence. There was probably a disease, something going on. The angel of the Lord was responsible for this. The adversary is what put it in the mind of King David, supposedly in the very beginning, to count the people wrongly, because they didn't need to be counted again. The fighting numbers of men aged 21 and higher were already pretty much known. But anyway, it's not germane. Araunah, the king of the old Jebusite area there, gave everything he had to King David, including the cattle, the wood for the altar. And he said, may Hashem, your God, accept your offerings. But the king told Araunah, no free elevation offerings or peace offerings. So Hashem then answered the prayers of the land, and pestilence ceased from Israel. So anyway, King David paid him 50 shekels for the threshing floor, paid him more gold and silver, equivalent to shekels, a number of shekels, for the wood and the cattle. I guess the cattle were considered kosher because they're used for the sacrifice. You can read a little bit more detail in First Chronicles. So where I'm going with this? Where am I going with this? Okay, didn't mean to preach to you. Anyway, this is context. Okay, the threshing floor. Where was it located? In Mount Moriah, adjacent to Mount Zion, which is essentially the old city of King David. We are currently excavating that area as we speak. And southeast Jerusalem, yes, it's old quarter, old Jewish quarter there. Okay, so you know a threshing floor is a certain size. It doesn't specify here the exact size, but a threshing floor needs to be a little bit elevated above the ground. Okay, it could be a stony ground, flat hardened mud brick or something like this, but it had to be flat, had to be an even surface to be able to thresh stalks of wheat to produce separate grain from chaff. And also, it needed not be so high that the wind, as you go up into the mountains, it gets windy, right? Pressure differential and all that. I don't get into a meteorological discussion. But it cannot be that high because the wind would blow everything away, okay? And you don't take animals up on top of a mountain to do this in the first place. Okay, the old city of David is already elevated. I'm not sure how many hundreds of feet above sea level that it is, but it's already on a mountainous area known as Zion. Mount Moriah, I recently found out, geologically speaking, the geography of this, if you can picture Jerusalem from, I'd say, from east to west, okay, Har Habayit, the Temple Mount, is actually to the far western borders of Jerusalem. Is not part of the old city of David, okay? It is on Mount Moriah, but is on the western part of Mount Moriah. There's the Kidron Valley that actually separates the old city of David and Mount Moriah, and already talked about the Gihon Spring and the importance for that, for mikvahs, for burnt offerings and things of that nature. So the threshing floor was the center point there, the center point on Mount Moriah, the eastern part of Mount Moriah that King David had access to. And it was actually very close to his palace. and to this day is close to his regarded tomb. Okay, so the threshing floor was a flat area, elevated a little bit higher than the other area, the buildings and everything in the old city of David. That was a center point, supposedly where Yitzhak and Abraham went up for, the burnt offering that never happened. But this was considered a sacred place because, remember, Hashem told Gad to tell King David to build an altar there to alleviate the pestilence. So there was an offering made there that removed the pestilence from Israel, and God accepted that holy offering on that place. Remember, at that time, only one place was allowed to have offerings, and that was in the old city of David, on the Mount Moriah. The threshing floor was not previously known until this pestilence thing happened. Okay, the pestilence was the center point where by tradition Abraham took Yitzhak. Okay, so think about the threshing floor where it was located. Folks, just use common sense here. Har HaBayit is a high elevated foundational structure of about 36 to 40 acres in length. Is rectangular shaped. It's high up on a mountain. It is higher than the old city of David, okay? Can you picture a threshing floor anywhere up there, okay? This is just common sense. I'm just trying to put together this jigsaw puzzle of thousands of years old history we're just uncovering literally every day. So think about the threshing floor, what it is and what it's not. When King David discovered that Araunah had a threshing floor that God had a vested interest in, he purchased it, offered an offering there. Long story short, the Ark of the Covenant, the Mishkan that was out in the desert, was brought up there too. They probably had a tent. It was in Gibeon, I believe, previously. And then eventually King Solomon was allowed to build the temple. He built the temple around or very close to that threshing floor area. Of course, you had to bring in soil and dirt and build up restraining walls and things like that, because that was right on the edge of the Kidron Valley. Okay, you didn't want the temple to fall in the Kidron Valley. But anyway, I thought this was interesting. For more information, just reading First Chronicles and 2 Samuel. Very interesting about the threshing floor aspect. Very holy territory. Remember, it's in the Tanakh, folks. It's there. It's black and white. What it is and what it's not. Take care and shalom aleichem.